So last week, Jon Stewart devoted an episode of his little-watched Apple TV show to the subject of so-called transgender rights. It was his attempt to hit back against those transphobic extremists who believe that human biology exists. Now, Stewart, like so many other aging leftists, is a recent convert to gender ideology. Sometime in the last few years, he decided that women can have penises and men can have babies. He didn't explain his conversion. We don't know if there was a road to Damascus moment wherein a pregnant man appeared to him and unveiled the secrets of the universe, or if he experienced some other sort of vision. But he did apologize for his past acknowledgement of scientific reality. He regrets it deeply, and he's pledged to never make the same mistake again. Stewart's efforts to debunk biology consisted primarily of him smirking at clips of people saying common sense things. Stewart, of course, belongs to that school of political debate which teaches that a smarmy grin and a laugh track qualify as a counter-argument. He's not the only one to employ this strategy. His understudy, John Oliver, who hosts a slightly more popular but still little-watched show on HBO, has also made a career out of this same tactic. Oliver has earned a reputation on the left for thoroughly demolishing conservative arguments. A reputation that is relatively easy for him to maintain because nobody actually watches his show to find out if it's accurate or not. If they did, they would see that his manner of demolishing an argument is to deliver a series of the most standard and banal left-wing talking points imaginable, couched in lies and half-truths. But these rants apparently still count as an epic smackdown because Oliver is extremely snide. I mean, even more snide than your usual leftist. And he peppers in a few lame punchlines, plenty of vulgarity, and also has a British accent. Indeed, the tagline of Oliver's show could be, and for all I know is, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, the same stuff you hear on MSNBC, except British, and with the F word. On Sunday, Oliver decided to follow his mentor's lead and bring his brand of snide propagandizing to the trans debate. He spent 30 minutes addressing what he describes as, quote, attacks on transgender rights. And the left ensures us that the entire segment is a brilliant, breathtaking, bulletproof defense of their position and a devastating takedown of the other side. The same was promised of Jon Stewart's attempt a week prior, only to discover that the devastating takedown was the rhetorical equivalent of an overinflated balloon. It only took the slightest pinprick to burst the whole thing. So does Oliver fare any better? Yes, they're both named John. They're both wildly overrated. They're both insufferable, smug little Muppets who imagine themselves to be about 65 IQ points smarter than they really are. But does that mean that they will fail, both of them, miserably in their attempts to engage with critics of gender ideology? Well, the answer, of course, is yes, but don't take my word for it. I will go through now John Oliver's segment, piece by piece, so that you can see for yourself. Oliver begins by calling out the, one or two Democrats in the country who are not yet fully committed members of the gender ideology cult, and we'll start there as well.
There are many on the left who seem at best reluctant to engage on this issue and at worst outright hostile to it, either complaining about pronoun police or arguing that this issue will cost Democrats elections.
If you go to the middle of the country, people would say, if your conversation during a presidential election is about some guy wearing a dress and whether he, she, or it can go to and go to the locker room with their daughter, that's not a winning formula for most people.
Wow. Michael Bloomberg can all the way off with that. But also, while this fun-sized billionaire is clearly good at a lot of things, like making money and end of list, maybe don't take advice on a winning formula for elections from a man who spent over $1 billion of his own money to lose a presidential bid in just 14 weeks.
Now, first of all, it is the grammatically correct gender-neutral pronoun. A human being who is neither male nor female, if such a creature existed, which it doesn't, would indeed be an it. It is a singular pronoun, whereas they, in most cases, is a pronoun that indicates multiple individuals. Now, is it dehumanizing? Yes, obviously it is. But a person who rejects their male or female identity has already dehumanized themselves or itself. To be human is to be male or female. There are no other options. If you reject that, then you reject your humanity. You have dehumanized yourself. Also, as far as Michael Bloomberg goes, Yes, his presidential campaign was an abysmal and often hilarious failure. We can agree on that. But the list of things that he's good at actually extends beyond simply making money, as Oliver claims. Here's one other highlight on Michael Bloomberg's resume. When he was mayor of New York, the city was actually livable. And ever since far left, or farther left Democrats anyway, took over, it has been a dystopian, crime-ridden hellscape. And I think that's worth noting. It's also worth noting that John Oliver is so thoroughly wrong about everything all the time that he just forced me to defend Michael Bloomberg. I already feel like I need to take a shower. We've only made it about a minute through this thing. Let's keep going.
Let's also remember that it's not actually the left talking about trans rights non-stop. It's Republicans who see an advantage in demagoguing this issue. And to ignore them doing that is to allow them to have real calamitous impact on people's lives. A few years ago, Vice profiled a girl named Kai Shapley, and just watch how happy she is talking about her hopes for a future until she remembers something that changes her mood.
Mama says I might grow up to be the president.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What would you change about the world if you were president?
Let trans people be free and go to the bathroom they want to go to.
Are you able to use the girls' bathroom at school?
No. And now they just put security guards up for the bathroom security or whatever. Oh, I hate that.
That is brutal. It is so dark, it's genuinely hard to watch.
Agreed, John. I mean, it is brutal and hard to watch. That is a very young boy who has been convinced by his parents that he is a girl. Not only that, but he is being paraded around on camera and used as a political prop. He has been made not only trans, but into a trans mascot. Very dark indeed. Now, how do I know that the boy is not a girl? Well, because a girl is a human female child, and that boy is a human child, but is not female. He is male. He is a boy. If you have some other alternative definition for the word girl, I'd love to hear it. In fact, nothing you say on this subject, John, no argument you present, no talking point you put forward has any meaning or any value or any significance at all if you cannot or will not define the words you're using. Now, here's something else I know about that boy, aside from the fact that he is one. The other thing I know, John, is that being a child and being confused and being raised in an environment which intentionally fosters confusion means that he has no real concept of what a girl is. That means that when he says, I am a girl, the statement doesn't mean anything. At best, he is trying to express his affinity for or interest in some of the things that he associates with girls, the color pink, long hair, dolls, whatever. None of that actually makes him a girl, John. And that's something that he needs an adult to explain to him. Unfortunately, all the adults in his life are just as confused as he is, or at least are pretending to be, just like you. Jumping ahead a bit, Oliver goes after Abigail Shrier, who's the author of the great book Irreversible Damage, about the trans epidemic claiming the minds and lives of countless adolescent girls. But Oliver sees no issue with millions of girls suddenly all at once in unison deciding that they're really boys. This is perfectly normal, John Oliver insists.
Shrier sometimes dresses her argument up by using the term rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is total horseshit. It comes from a study published by a researcher in 2018 hypothesizing that some kids identify as trans due to peer pressure. But it's worth you knowing that study was based on a survey of parents, not actual trans kids, and it targeted parents from organisations dedicated to opposing trans ideology, which is instantly disqualifying. It's like citing a study claiming that all postal workers are terrifying hell demons sent to attack your family, but then learning that the researchers only surveyed a collection of anxious dogs. That's some heavy sampling bias that clearly skewed your results. And to be very clear, there is ample evidence of gender variance throughout human history. And as far back as historians have found evidence of trans people, they found trans children. As for the rapid rise in kids identifying as trans, as the writer Julia Serrano has pointed out, when you look at a chart of left-handedness among Americans over the 20th century, you see a massive spike when we stopped forcing kids to write with their right hand, and then a plateau. That doesn't mean everyone became left-handed or that there was a rapid onset southpaw dysphoria. It means people were free to be who they were.
Okay. All of that should go without saying, nonsense. First of all, we don't need a study to tell us that rapid onset gender dysphoria exists any more than I need to read a study drawing a link between the proliferation of fast food and obesity. Such studies do exist, but people with functioning brains can draw obvious common sense conclusions without needing permission from a research paper to do it. Trans identification has risen 20-fold in the youngest generation. Even that example he gives of left-handedness, which is a red herring if I've ever seen one, that shows, what, a 6% rise over the course of decades? We're talking about 20-fold in the course of a few years. We went from almost nobody being confused about their gender to huge swaths of young people being confused about their gender. That is rapid. It is gender dysphoria. It seems that calling it rapid onset gender dysphoria makes a lot of sense. Oliver takes issue with the study that coins this phrase, questioning its credibility on the grounds that the researchers only surveyed the parents instead of the, quote, trans kids. Yes, because you're not likely to get a clear or accurate answer if you ask a child whether they're doing something because of peer pressure. See, the children also aren't fully cognizant of their own motivations. If you go up to a child and say, are you only doing that because of peer pressure? You're not likely to get a clear answer because it's a child. As a parent, you should be better equipped to explain your child's behavior than your child is himself. This is the insight that comes with age and maturity, for some of us anyway, obviously not for you, John. Oliver also says that the study is unreliable because the people who conducted it were allegedly biased. Now, that may or may not be true. I don't know anything about the study. It doesn't matter to me. I don't need the study to observe what I can clearly see all around me. But then John goes on through the whole rest of his diatribe to quote studies and experts who not only have clear left-wing biases, I mean, all of them, every single person that he cites as an authority, every single one has a clear left-wing bias. In that very same clip, at the end, he cites a left-wing activist about the left-handed thing. But not only that, not only do most of his authority figures have left-wing biases, they also have a financial stake in promoting and defending gender ideology. So he shows no concern for conflicts of interest in those cases. In fact, just like Jon Stewart, his entire defense of the mutilation and castration of children is that the people making money off of these procedures think it's a good idea. That is the entirety of his argument. He has no other argument. As for the, quote, ample evidence of gender variance throughout human history, well, I went and read the article that he cites because, he puts the quotes up there on the screen, and what you're supposed to do is just see the quote and then say to yourself, well, he had a quote on the screen, it must be true. But I actually went and looked at that National Geographic article, and what I found, as always, is that it points to examples from history of spiritual and religious practices where a man acts out the part of a woman. Okay, that is not the same as a man claiming to actually be a woman. It's not even close to the same. It's not even the same sort of thing. Unless, John, you're admitting that transgenderism today is a religious and spiritual conviction, because those are all of the historical comparisons that you are making. For the 1,000th time, there has never been, ever in history, not once, not anywhere, a culture that believed that men could literally, physically be women and vice versa. Ours is the only civilization that has ever believed in pregnant men. There is no precedent for that in history anywhere. One other point, John, later in the show, cites the high rates of suicide among trans kids. He says that suicidal ideation is as high as 57, I believe he says 57%, almost 60% for quote-unquote trans kids. Now, he blames this on a lack of affirmation. He says, indeed, the consequence of not affirming trans kids is that many will kill themselves. He also says that the reason there were not millions of trans kids historically is that they were not free to be who they effing were. Well, according to him then, as I've pointed out many times, there should be historically evidence of millions and millions and millions of kids all over the world every year for thousands of years killing themselves. That's how you connect those dots. High rates of suicide if you don't affirm. There were millions and millions of trans people through history that were not affirmed. And yet, no such evidence exists. It didn't happen. Kids only started killing themselves in significant numbers now, in modern times, in correlation with the rise in trans identifications. So what does that tell you, John? Can you turn the laugh track down for a moment and think clearly about this? It's not very hard to connect the dots. We'll play one more clip. Oliver eventually gets around to offering a defense of so-called gender-affirming care, and let's hear what that sounds like.
At the onset of puberty, an adolescent and their family might consider puberty blockers, hormones that delay puberty. And importantly, if that treatment is suspended, then puberty will resume, meaning that this is reversible. Think of it like a pause button, the thing you can't do easily on the HBO Max app. Now, the next potential medical intervention is usually hormone therapy, which boosts levels of testosterone or estrogen. Opponents of gender-affirming care make a lot of alarmist claims about hormone therapy, from saying that it's experimental, which it is not, to arguing that it sterilizes people. And look, for some, in specific situations, there can be risks to fertility, but for others, the effect is anticipated to be reversible if the medication is discontinued. But there is definitely an informed decision to be made there. You will notice that none of what I've mentioned so far is surgery, but when it does come to that, some teens may be eligible, for instance, for top surgery or chest masculinization. But you should know, not only is that pretty rare, it, like all of this, would only happen after a team of medical professionals discussed all of its risks and benefits with their patient and their patient's parent or guardian, all of whom would have to sign off. It is a long, involved process even before you get to the fact that it's also incredibly expensive, which is why working class families, families of colour and people with less resources are way less able to access it. Basically, no kid is casually dropping into an operating room because they just decided to get their uterus removed with the impulsive recklessness normally associated with getting bangs. Because that is an absolutely ridiculous thing to say.
Yes, it is a ridiculous thing to say, John, which is why nobody is saying it. You have very impressively torched a straw man, but let's get back to the reality. First, John claims that puberty blockers are totally reversible and merely put a pause on puberty. This is simply a lie. I'm not going to speculate about whether John Oliver is smart enough to know that it's a lie. Everything he says can be explained either by his idiocy or his utter lack of integrity, but it's impossible to know which aspect of his personality is flaring up at any given moment. What we can say is that the NHS used to claim that puberty blockers are reversible. They had it on their website. If you go to the website now, it's not there. They removed that claim from their website, and they now admit that, in fact, they don't really know anything about the long-term effects of these drugs on kids. Why don't they know? Well, because we've never put millions of physically healthy kids on this kind of drug regime before. So we don't know. There's no way to know for certain what the long-term effects are. Anyone who claims they know is lying. These kids are being experimented on. We don't yet have the full results of the experiment. It is ongoing right now. Yet common sense would tell us that all drugs have side effects, especially those that intentionally interfere with the natural physical development during childhood. You cannot pause the human body like you pause a television, John, which, by the way, it's not that hard to figure out how to pause on HBO Max. I'm not even sure what you're talking about. This is not science fiction, okay? Human bodies can't just hang out in a state of suspended animation without consequence. That's not how it works. Oliver then acknowledges that hormone therapy for children does sterilize them, but he just kind of hand waves it away and assures us that for some, sure, there are kids that are being sterilized, but for some, the effects of the drugs are anticipated to be reversible if the medication is discontinued in time. That is a lot of qualifiers. A lot of qualifiers attached to that sentence. In other words, yes, it permanently damages a child's body, permanently sterilizes them, but that's okay because sometimes, potentially, maybe, it won't harm them as much if they stop it before the worst side effects set in. In other words, Oliver knows that the drugs harm kids, but he doesn't care. He takes the same approach to mutilation surgeries on minors, assuring us that there are no genital surgeries happening to kids under the age of 18, which is just a lie. And then he also says that chest masculinization, otherwise known as double mastectomy, only happens if all the people who will make money on the procedure say that it should happen. This is the best defense that Oliver can offer. It's not only dishonest and deceptive and strikingly stupid, but also morally horrifying. And notice the two questions that Oliver avoids. He never grapples with the issue of consent. Can a child under the age of 18 actually consent to any of this? Can a 14-year-old consent to taking a drug that will likely sterilize him? Can a 15-year-old girl consent to having her breast removed? Oliver spends 30 minutes dancing around the subject, but never once offers his own theory of consent. Of course he doesn't, because he doesn't want to be on the record arguing that a 14-year-old can consent, because he knows how horrifying and creepy and disturbing that would sound. But he also doesn't want to be on the record acknowledging that these things are happening to kids without their consent. The question of consent presents an impossible problem for his side of the argument, and he knows it. So he ignores it, which makes literally everything he says on the subject of, quote, gender-affirming care for minors irrelevant, as he is slithering around and avoiding one of our primary and most fundamental objections to it. But there's an even more fundamental objection, which he also avoids. And that is this. It is not true that a boy can be a girl or a girl can be a boy. It is not true that gender is fluid. Gender ideology is false. It does not reflect the actual reality that we find ourselves situated in. John Oliver, like every other propagandist on that side, simply leaps over this point. But you can't leap over it. We're not challenging your views simply on the basis that it causes harm to people, though that is one of our most important objections. We are challenging its factual validity. Okay? We are saying that it is not true. And so, if you have any hope of even coming close to debunking any of our arguments, you must begin by defending the fundamental proposition that a male can be a woman and a female can be a man. If you skip that question, then you skip the whole debate, John. Just as people skip your show on HBO Max. Because unlike you, apparently, they're smart enough to work a remote. The pause button is right there in the middle for future reference. That'll do it for this portion of the show. As we move over to the members block, hope to see you there. If not, talk to you tomorrow. Godspeed.